Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast, a little instant reaction to the Texas Orange-White spring game, recapping 15 practices for Steve Sarkisian's defending Big 12 champion football team as they head off to the SEC. Of course, I'm Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague, the one and only Eric Henry. Eric, you and I we're still here at DKR. We've just finished talking to Steve Sarkisian, to quarterback Quinn Ewers, to linebacker David Benda. We're going to each give a few takeaways from the spring game, but really the spring. And Eric, why don't you lead us off, my friend?
Yeah, let's start with one of the more glaring questions of the spring. And it's something that we knew was going to be a question the day that Byron Murphy declared for the NFL draft. And of course, Devondre Sweat's eligibility exhausted. That was the defensive line, in specificity, the defensive interior. So Steve Sarkisian, in his postgame, said the depth on the defensive line is not where it needs to be. But he did make sure, he went out of his way to emphasize that he felt the front end, top line guys were good. You'd have to assume that is Ethan Burke, that is Barron Sorrell, that is Alfred Collins, who made a nice play there, hauling in the interception off the, was it a Burke tip, I believe?
Yeah, a batted pass by Ethan Burke.
Here you go. Takes it for a pick six. He made a nice play. And then Vernon Broughton, who, listen, I'm not going to bash Broughton. It's a spring game. In my opinion, not a massive deal. He got married today. So Vernon Broughton was not in attendance. So you have to assume with those frontline guys.
What, is that the only day they could get to church, Eric? I mean, come on. It's the spring game.
Listen, maybe you're seeing the difference here in both of us because, Chip is a happily married man. I haven't crossed that threshold yet. So maybe I'm waxing poetically about the concept of marriage, whereas Chip was like, hey, the date couldn't have been changed. Fair point on Chip Brown's part. Nevertheless, here's what kind of my major takeaway is. When you take a look, those second line guys, what does that look like? Let's just go to the edges. Justice Finkley, Jamon Tapp along with the program, right? Where you kind of have some of these situations where, hey, look, you're going to play in excess of 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 defensive linemen in games. You're going to play in terms of defensive interior, 6 defensive tackles. Where does that show up? Because there's no doubt about that this program is heading into the toughest football league in America, the SEC. Steve Sarkisian emphasized today, hey, not very many teams across the nation are playing 100 plays of football and tackled. We did that today. But that's just what stood out to me. Steve Sarkisian said that because of the talent level at various positions has been leveled up, maybe it's a little bit easier to see some spots that may be glaring. The depth on the defensive line, what does that look like? You brought in Tia Savea. We're still seeing how that's working out. Chip wrote about it in the Insider and various times during the spring. Jere Bledsoe appears to be making a push, making his move, but he's only one guy. What does that look like? You got a bevy of defensive interior guys, Sadir Mitchell and Zach Swanson, Aaron Bryant. We heard a lot about Alex January in the spring. We'll have to see how those guys can kind of come along. But Chip, and I'll pass to you on this, because I know you have kind of your first take what you're going to get into, but we've talked about it a lot on the main Flagship podcast. It's not necessarily that you're going to replace Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, but are you getting 70% of what you had last year? Are you getting 80% of what you got last year? And what percentage of that is enough to compete in the SEC?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, you've got to have horses in the middle of that defense. And we did see a couple nice plays today. You mentioned Alex January. He had a nice play behind the line. Eric, one of the things, we'll kind of work our way from bad news to good news, because obviously when you have long touchdown passes to a bunch of different guys today, and not just long touchdown passes, but Trey Owens was hitting his high school teammate, Pritchard. Hell, I need to bone up on my walk-ons.
Thatcher Milton?
Thatcher Milton. Yeah. Thank you, for crying out loud. Got to give Thatcher Milton his due. But there were a lot of big pass plays completed in the Orange-White game. That's thrilling and exciting for the offense. It's bad news for the defense. Now, Jahdae Barron did not play in the spring game. He's recovering, getting healthy. You had a a nice, really nice route concept where you had Terrence Brooks and Jalen Gilbo. Apparently, some miscommunication there. Jalen Gilbo stayed in zone coverage in the flat, and Terrence Brooks thought he was passing off DeAndre Moore, and DeAndre Moore ran all by himself for a long touchdown pass. The secondary has got to get it together, and obviously, we didn't see a lot of buzz from Derek Williams or Michael Taft, the frontline guys, but Terrence Brooks is a frontline guy. Gavin Holmes is a frontline guy. He got beat by Isaiah Bond on a deep touchdown late in the Orange-White game. So the secondary has got to get together. The coaches have to figure it out. That's got to be better because, you can't be giving up those big plays like they did last year, primarily on first and second down. The pass defense has got to get better, Eric.
Well, Chip, I'm going to just take it to the flip side of that, right? You talk about the pass defense needing to step up. Well, a major beneficiary, you could say in some ways, of that was Arch Manning. Arch Manning had a heck of a spring game. It's kind of weird. You juxtapose this to a year ago when he was, fresh out of high school, losing the ID, still finding his way around the 40 acres. They fast forward 1 year later, and he looks like a completely different guy. As Chip said, you had the one TD that clearly was a blown coverage again, where Terrence Brooks was to pass off. We'll see what happened there. He and Jalen Gilbo as far as the miscommunication, but that ended up being a long touchdown pass. But overall, you're talking about a kid who goes 19 of 25 for over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. The only interception being the Hail Mary on the final play of the game in which he's trying to bring the white team back for a last-second victory there. But listen, I wrote about this earlier this week when kind of looking at questions to kind of go into the spring game. You can take a look across the college football landscape. The number is 67, Chip. 67 FBS quarterbacks played in every single game or started and played in every single game that they were available to play in. That is less than 50% of the 133 FBS teams in the nation. What does that mean? There's a fair chance that your QB2 may have to play at some point. We know Quinn Ewers the past 2 seasons, despite the fact that we're dealing with a bulked up Quinn Ewers who now says he's at 205 and wants to get between 206 and 208, 209. We'll have to see what happens there. So if Arch Manning has to play in a game or start a game like Malik Murphy started 2 last year for Texas, I don't know about, maybe just how the rest of this offseason will play out, or we'll have to see what the fall will look like. But just based off of what we've seen in the spring, I think you have to feel comfortable enough to say, okay, there is a quarterback who can legitimately step in and, if need be, start a game or 2 or however many it is. And this offense, which again, as Chip talked about, seemingly is got the ball rolling a little bit here, won't miss a beat. And in my mind, I think that's huge. We can forget about all the other talk about, ridiculous quarterback content. That's not a thing. Quinn Ewers is the quarterback. He's starting quarterback on this team. But if Arch Manning needs to step in and play, I think what you saw there today has to give Longhorns fans a measure of comfort going into summer.
Yeah. And Trey Owens looked good too.
Yeah.
Okay. As we work toward the good news, I think the edge rushers for Texas have improved over last year. Now, Ethan Burke and Barron Sorrell had really good seasons last year. There's no doubt about it. They're great edge setters against the run. They both had 5 and 5+ sacks, well-timed sacks too, if you'll remember. Barron Sorrell against Kansas State late, and Ethan Burke in the middle of the K-State game with the strip sack that led to a touchdown in a game that Texas won in overtime. So, but you've added Trey Moore, you've added Colin Simmons, and I thought the really good news we heard today and saw in the Orange-White game is Colton Vasek, who missed last year with back issues. He has showed up. Remember, this is the guy that Christian Jones nicknamed Baby Bosa. So Colton Vasek has got that length. He's a tough kid. His dad, Brian Vasek, played on the defensive line at Texas. That's a great set of news there, that Colton Vasek, and you have Trey Moore, and you have Colin Simmons. Colin Simmons showed up in the Orange-White game with a sack, and I think they're going to be better when it comes to the obvious passing down. So that's my second takeaway, Eric.
Yeah, I'll go to my third, kind of transition it back to the offensive side of the football. And we've talked about the explosiveness, and you saw some of the big plays out there. So let's just go to the wide receiver room. In my mind, I think that's listen, Chip, how many times did Steve Sarkisian talk about versatility last year, right? Saying that his team can win games, a variety of ways. Well, I think, at least at this point, but I think this is something that you definitely can transition into the fall and you feel very comfortable saying. One of those ways can be via this passing game with some of the explosive receivers. And it's just really interesting to see the way this wide receiver room has been remade, right? Because, Chip, it wasn't that long ago that Xavier Worthy declared for the NFL draft. You know that Jordan Whittington was going to exhaust his eligibility, and A.D. Mitchell declared for the NFL draft. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, we know we've got some young guys, some underclassmen haven't played, and you're kind of hopeful about, but what does this receiver room look like in 2024? Well, Quinn Ewers makes a decision to come back, and that's followed by the arrival of Isaiah Bond. Ryan Wingo, the five-star true freshman, comes in. Matthew Golden from Houston comes in. Those guys are all looking like playmakers. This is one thing that stands out to me, Chip, is Ryan Wingo. And this is just me, I don't put a ton of stock overall in spring games because you're not sure, sometimes coaches are looking for certain things and some guys look like they're going full speed and things of that nature. I don't care what anybody says. What you saw out there today from Ryan Wingo, that to me is transferable to August 30th, if memory serves me correct, 31st, when the season opens against Colorado State. That's transferable in my mind. So when you have that, we saw Matthew Golden, who Steve Sarkisian's talked about, has been slowed a little bit by some injuries. He looks to be the guy that, scored and had success against Texas last year. Of course, Jonte Cook, nice to see him getting some run as well. Isaiah Bond looks very explosive. So where does that leave, in my mind, a guy like Silas Bolden? We know he's going to get here after Memorial Day, and we'll see what happens. And when he gets here in the summer, but it's a fair question to say. It's not that you think he's necessarily locked out of a job. Steve Sarkisian mentioned during his availability on Tuesday that guys can get here in the fall and certainly make up for any ground. Certain guys who had bad springs, they can regain ground, or in the case of Silas Bolden, you weren't here during the spring, you can make up ground. And I don't think you come to Texas with 1 year of eligibility left and not have some sort of assurance that you're going to play. But I'm just saying, what we saw from the receivers today, a very explosive group. And listen, it's first world problems, Chip. You want to have as many explosive playmakers as possible. You'd rather have too many than not enough playmakers. But definitely something to keep an eye on, especially with Amari Nyblack and Gunnar Helm and Juan Davis at tight end spot as well.
Yeah, and we've heard from Steve Sarkisian that Parker Livingstone has had a good spring, that Aaron Butler has had a good spring. I'm fascinated to see how Steve Sarkisian's going to handle that receiver rotation. I think my final takeaway after talking to a bunch of team sources and watching the orange-white game today is Jaden Blue is a man on a mission. And CJ Baxter, what a 1-2 punch. And Trey Wisner, who has emerged now as kind of the third back in this offense. And I just think that this is a strength for this football team. Those two came on late last year. Jaden Blue averaging 6.1 yards per carry. CJ Baxter averaging 4.8 yards per carry. Both of them can catch the football. We saw Jaden Blue with a touchdown catch today. I think Texas, with that veteran offensive line, is going to have a running game that will help to build that play action pass for Quinn Ewers. And I think that's a real positive. If kind of one final takeaway, Eric, the linebacker position still needs to get solidified. I think we didn't see a ton of Anthony Hill today. It was a lot of Leonga Lafau and Kendrick Blackshire. And Leonga Lafau, is a guy that they're trying to make sure is ready to go. And honestly, they're trying to get Anthony Hill comfortable at middle linebacker after playing primarily at weak side linebacker last year. So lots to work on over the summer, but it was an exciting orange-white game today.
Yeah, Chip, I guess just one final takeaway for me that I think would be interesting is, this defense overall as a whole. You talk about it in terms of, some of the big plays allowed, and you want to get those things cleaned up. But I'm curious, I asked David Benda, following the orange and white game, just kind of quick thoughts if you could juxtapose last year's defense compared to this, and he feels that the talent is there. But we all know takeaways were a big emphasis entering last year, Chip. So if this defense, for whatever reason, it's not having Devontae Sweat and Byron Murphy and seeing how they replace those guys, are they able to create big plays of their own? Because that can be the eraser. That can be the thing that kind of covers up certain things if you're creating big plays. So again, still too early to tell, but I'll be interested to see when we talk, with coordinators in a few months, kind of where they are in terms of that regard, Chip.
Yeah. All right. For Eric Henry, I am Chip Brown. Thanks for tuning in to this special edition of the Flagship podcast, recapping the orange-white spring game. Until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. Stay safe and keep the